Good morning and welcome to One Vision podcast. You're with us live on YouTube, and also you will be seeing on the Spotify website. I'm here joined with a very special guest from Hertfordshire, Alex Woodman, Director of Community Protection and Chief Fire Officer. Good morning, Alex.
Morning, Ian.
How are
Thank you
you
for having me.
today?
I'm very well, very well. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for coming to One Vision and joining us the podcast. People are looking forward to hear from you and your plans. Let me start asking you about your career as a policeman from Met in London. Can you just talk to us about, especially with London, what you've been doing since you started as a police?
Absolutely, yeah. So I started off in the Met as a PC, spent most of my time in East London, Bethnal Green, Limehouse and around there. Uh, Worked through a range of roles in policing, the traditional uniform public order roles and then into some more specialist areas. And then an opportunity came up to move into local government. So I actually moved out of the Met initially into Westminster Council, different range of roles there, predominantly into enforcement, licensing, environmental health, the wider regulatory standards work. Moved through promotion, and then this opportunity came up to leave London, leave Westminster, and come across to Hertfordshire and lead the fire and rescue service and community protection. So great opportunity.
Brilliant. So most of your career spent in London area and great experience. So what actually attracted to a county from London?
I think there was a number of things that really sort of drew me into Hertfordshire because I've got the real luxury of having two parts of my role. One about being part of the county council itself, and as I said, my predominant function is leading community protection, but then also to lead a fire and rescue service, so the draw of the emergency services back to me. So I've had links with the county all my life, family living up here, so great county itself. And I think when I met with the team as part of the process, the early engagement, meeting with my, and I'll say nice things because he's my new boss now, as Owen Mapley is the chief exec, but no, meeting with Owen, the vision that he had for the county, where he wants to take things, it was a real draw for me. And then ever since I've started, the teams that I've met across fire and rescue, the teams that I've met across trading standards, that real core delivery back into public service and the ability to do it in a different way that isn't London centric. And I think, I've thoroughly enjoyed my time in London, thoroughly enjoyed the experience it's given me, but it is nice to branch out and not just be London centric all the time. The real country is out of London is always what I've said. So, it's been a great landing since I've arrived here and a real opportunity to meet with a completely different community.
So the community protection directorate which you lead, I'm sure I've read somewhere consists of comprises with three key areas, which is the community protection and resilience and the fire services.
That's
Could
it.
you just briefly talk about the three areas you work with?
Certainly. So as you said, there's a number of key areas of what makes up community protection. So one large area of the portfolio is regulatory standards. So our trading standards team, consumer protection, colleagues that are absolutely focused on protecting the public. You'll hear more from sort of scam awareness, fraud, targeting vulnerable people. So our trading standards teams deal with a myriad of things, right the way from inspecting into outbreaks of avian flu and bird flu, working with the more rural part of the community. So a really interesting part of the business. Then there's the fire and rescue service, which is made up of three key areas where I've got operations, prevention and protection. So that's about keeping people safe, responding to things when, whether it be fire, accidents, incidents have happened, and then the prevention work where we work with young people, Prince's Trust, life courses, and then you touched on the resilience area. So another hat that I hold for the county is that I'm the chair of the local resilience forum and the resilience team that coordinates that both for the county and for all of the partnerships that sit as part of the forum sit with me as part of the directorate. So three sort of key strands that are all front facing, people focused, protection, prevention, and looking after the community.
Fabulous. Alex, you mentioned about keeping safe. We cannot go away without talking about the COVID last 2 years. Um, I'm sure that keeping safe during the COVID probably the biggest priority you ever had. Is there any lessons to be learned?
I think, as you said, the global pandemic, COVID, I think we've got to a point where we're almost so, I see people's shoulders drop when you hear the word COVID now, don't you? So what my current role, we have a strategic coordination group, and that brings together all of the key partners, your blue light services, the county council, health, the hospitals, all of the key players you would expect to see in a forum that coordinates and responds to any major incident. But as they're focused on and have been, and actually it was my predecessor, Darryl Keane, who was the previous chief fire officer, who's led actually the predominant work for the county for COVID. So I think whilst I have the opportunity, a great thanks to him and the team that really bore the brunt of this, I've picked this up since I joined in August. But I think what we've learned from COVID is that there is not one entity that can deal with everything. You need to bring together really strong collaboration, strong partnership. And I think a big piece for that, as me, is around the community and how the community has stepped forward. Because you would be foolish to think that any single public sector entity can deal with everything. You can't. You need those links. You need those relationships. And I think one of the key hopes that I've got, if the one thing I think you've always got to try and do in any tragic or major incident or difficult or critical incident is learn from it, take a legacy from it, and build back stronger when you come back from what has happened. And I think for me with COVID, that collaboration and partnership and understanding all of those key links in how you bring a community together has to be a big learning point from it. And I think, if you look at what happened during COVID, the acute shock that put across the globe and the impact that had, what we saw was the pace and speed that we need to deal with the most vulnerable in our community, the ability that we could respond quickly and get, whether that's food provision or support or healthcare or medicines delivered to people. What we saw was a community response to that. And I think that's the best legacy that we can take forward from this. And what we mustn't do is lose that collaboration, the strong relationships that have been brought to together during that time. So for me, as I move back into my LRF chair's role, which is all about preparing us for the risk as a county, that network and those relationships is one that I'm really keen that we see is a real focal point for us going forward.
In terms of helping the community during the COVID, I'm sure that the fire services had a big role playing in delivering vaccination. Is there anything, and people watching there, sometimes people might be first time hearing from you, where on fire service comes to deliver the vaccination?
So it's an interesting, I think it just shows how adaptable fire and rescue services are. And I've always said, people don't join the fire and rescue service to, sit indoors and not roll their sleeves up and want to get out and help people. So there was a number of roles that fire and rescue took on during the pandemic, which was one, as you said, the support to set up and get vaccination centres up and running, coordination and logistics. There was even work around an operation called Operation Eagle, which was around outbreak in testing in coordinating areas, and it was the fire service that came together with partners. And what I'm always keen to do is that, yes, fire and rescue played a real prominent role in many things, but what I wouldn't want to lose sight of is the other partners that were there too. There's an easy time when you can feel that, it was fire did this or policing did that or the county did. Actually, it was a big one team approach in what went on, and whilst certain areas may have stepped forward, and absolutely real credit to some of the fire and rescue teams that led on that. But what we can't do is forget the wider partners that were doing it as well, and colleagues from the county council and others that were really working as a single team approach to deliver on these vaccination centres or delivering with mass testing. And many people in the county will have heard from Jim McManus as our Exec Director for Public Health. Jim often speaks about the value of the partnerships and bringing everyone together and what was achieved. So, yeah, a very, fire and rescue is adaptable. Absolutely. Fire and rescue will always step forward to support the community, and we will always look to provide any support, whether that's through logistics or our command team officers that can come in and support and grip situations at pace and get the right structures and, frameworks in place. So absolutely, fire and rescue will
I have
always
to
step
give
forward.
my hats off to some of the fire officers, because I've seen in my own eye bringing out mobile unit and putting a marquee in, in a park or something, vaccination. You absolutely put your hands on and delivering. So, Alex, we almost come to a place where we have to live with COVID now. So, you probably agree with me that living with this COVID is something going forward. So, what support mechanism or what support you give to the people who are going to be live with COVID for long term?
I think so. Living safely with COVID is the term that we're referring to at the minute. And I think there's a myriad of approaches that we're currently looking at. And I think the first and foremost piece is that and I know, as I said, I refer to Jim again as our Exec Director for Public Health. Jim and I speak probably daily, I think, at the minute about many factors. And I know Jim would want me to say is that what we can't do is lose sight of the good work that everyone has done to protect ourselves during this period. And what we must do is still keep that good sense approach to keeping our hands clean, making sure that we minimise against the risk of spread of the virus. We know COVID is out there. We know COVID is still circulating in our communities. We know that our hospitals are still managing and our NHS staff are still dealing with the impacts of COVID and long-term effects. So we've all got to take that personal responsibility to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to minimise the spread and keep that good advice that's come forward. But at the same time, I think what we've got to recognise is that being locked away and the lockdowns, whilst they created those fire breaks and had the impact that we need, that has had a detrimental impact on communities, on people's mental health, on people's mental well-being. So there's a very fine balance that we've got to keep between keeping ourselves and each other safe, but at the same time not losing that human contact, the ability for, because what happens then behind closed doors or when people retreat behind closed doors is a major risk for us. And there are many unintended consequences of that. And we've got to be alive to that and we've got to be responsive. So I think for me, it is about taking that advice that public health colleagues, NHS colleagues will give out. We mustn't lose sight of it. I know we all want it to go away and I know we don't want to, we want COVID gone, absolutely, but we can't lose sight of the fact that it is still there. And what we don't want is sudden surges. So it was important. The speed and pace that people and the community got themselves vaccinated was critical. Taking advice of keeping hands clean, keeping that distance, wearing masks at the right time has no doubt saved lives and kept people safe. And we've got to keep that awareness alive. And at the same time, though, we do need to start seeing communities come back together. We look at the impact it's had on business, look at the impact it's had. So there is a very fine balance that we want to keep, and we must recognise that we've still got some very vulnerable people in our community who are seriously at risk of the impact of this virus.
Yeah. No, you talked about, great, you shared some of your priorities living with COVID. I'm certainly sure that there might be some risk or challenges you may, unknown or something. Is there anything you can share about what are the challenges you may face during the long term with COVID?
So I think there's an element of unknown. You cannot put such an acute shock on the globe for the period that we've gone through and expect that we are going to spring back without any impact. And I touch on people's mental health. I think of our young people. I think of my own children that, my youngest two are 10 and 11. Now, for nigh on 2.5 years of their lives, that they've only been with me for 10 and 11 years, but for 2.5 of those years, major time for them was spent in a different way than I spent my childhood. And, that impact, I think, is something that we've got to be alive to. And I hope, children are normally quite resilient to change and they do bounce back. But that impact on their schooling, that impact on relationships, how's that going to play through now when they start moving into their latter teens, moving into university? You know, these things are points that we've got to be very aware of, and we've got to think about that support. But it's not, you know, just about young people. Everyone's been affected. You know, older generations who have become more isolated, or the real fear that it put, you know, and it's still there for a lot of people, and that anxiety that it's caused in our community. You cannot overlook the fact that that is still going to be with people, and that support, that treatment, that well-being is something that we will have to pick up as services, and the demand that will have on our services for something that we might not have been prepared for 3 years ago. The impact on budgets, you know, we have to be, you know, there is an arm of me where I have to think about the impact on our budgets and think about how we're going to have to respond to a community differently. So my feeling is that, you know, I think that impact on people's mental health and well-being is one that we mustn't lose sight of. You know, we can, it's easy to treat things. You know, I've always said, if someone's got a broken leg, we've got a broken leg, we know how to deal with that. But that impact for someone's mental health and well-being is complex and difficult, and we need to be alive to that and make sure that we're ready to support people.
On the same subject, you know, we live in a very uncertainty in current situation with COVID. I'm sure that you will agree with me. The immigrant level is going up and up with current situation with Afghanistan and war in Ukraine. And we're also facing the food insecurity. There's a lot of going on. Is that something you can touch base on?
Absolutely. I think, you know, what we do as whether you ask me in my role as our resilience forum, or how the county is leading through its strategic migration partnerships that's led by my colleague Scott Crudgington, who's our deputy chief exec, who chairs that group. We are seeing impacts of, you know, the global pandemic and what has had a significant impact on our community. There is the situation that's happening in Ukraine, and those tragic scenes, and the number of people that are having to leave their homes and community, and how we as a country and respective county and community will respond to support them. We are very focused on making sure that we are ready with people. You know, people are offering their homes, people are offering support, and quite rightly, as the county and different emergency services, we are positioned and ready to support and make sure that we can take people in. We've seen the same with what's happened in Afghanistan. We saw it with Hong Kong and people coming over. So you're right, for the last few years, we have opened our doors to make sure that we can support those in desperate need. And I think it's an absolute credit to us as a country, but also to how we've responded as a community and services to make sure that we can support those who are desperately, desperately in need. I know, you know, just this week, National Fire Chiefs Council is coordinating, sending across many pieces of kit and equipment and fire engines and specialist support to our colleagues in Ukraine. Ukrainian firefighters are there on the front line trying to protect their communities. So we've seen some real excellent things come forward, and real credit to the fire service across the UK and NFCC for coordinating this, that we are able to respond as a community and as a country to those in need. So I think we're in a really good place to support locally. The Strategic Migration Partnership has been working for some considerable time now, and there's a really strong partnership there to be able to respond and support those communities. And actually the conversation you and I are having before we start here about how organisations like yourself and the charity and VPAC and Christy Thacker, who sits as part of the Strategic Coordination Group. Christy's done some excellent work in bringing together community services to respond. And we touched on it earlier, didn't we? Cultural awareness is absolutely critical as part of this. And what we want to make sure that we're doing as a county and as a community is being really genuinely supporting those families that are coming in from really, really difficult environments. You know, I can't imagine what those families have gone through and what they've seen. And absolute credit to all of those teams that are on the front line, and services like yours and partners that are providing absolute hands-on support. I think it's an absolute credit to the community and what's been achieved.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex. You're holding these two important things in your hand, like a right and a left, is community protection and fire service. I'm sure that you have a vision. Can you talk to us? How does it fit into countywide and also the national priorities?
So the starting point for me with it, and this I'd take into any role that I'd go into, I want Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue. I want Hertfordshire County Council's Community Protection Directorate to be an absolute national leader in what we are doing. And I want to make sure that as a county, I position all of my services where we are leading the way in service delivery for our communities. Because I fundamentally believe if you are a national leader, if you are demonstrating that you are absolutely there influencing and leading the sector, that has to be a real positive benefit for our communities because the services we deliver.
Yeah.
So, the county itself, we are working, as I said, I've mentioned Owen Mapley, who's my chief executive, working with Owen on the vision for the county going forward. And you'll have seen publications, recent publications about us being a cleaner and greener environment, healthy and fulfilling lives for our residents. Sustainable, responsible growth is a real key part of this. And then the strapline underneath it all for me is excellent council services. And that's a really clear message that I get from my boss and something that I want cascaded down through all of our services. And I've always said, I don't want any of the community to ever meet any of my services because it means something's gone wrong actually, but I want them to have confidence to know that if we do need to come out and provide that emergency support to the community or keep people safe from scams from our regulatory departments, that we are absolutely on top of our game and at the forefront of what we're doing. So, the vision and what we're looking to achieve, I want us to be nationally leading. I want our training to be nationally recognised for a centre of excellence. I want all of my staff, all of my teams absolutely collaboratively embedded within all of the different services, right down into community levels. I touched on earlier, even our fire stations, to me, yes, of course they're fire stations, but they're community hubs as well, and I want us fully integrated with the community. And I want to make sure that we are servicing community needs on a number of different levels. So for me, it's a great opportunity, really, really unique time of what we're doing. Really strong direction from the county about wanting to see partnership across public health, children's services, adult services. Recently created a role of an executive director for sustainability, and I'm working with Patsy Dell, who leads on that, about how we'll work with her to drive my services forward. So I think for me, from a link with the county, link with fire and rescue, link with regulatory services, it's a really exciting time for where we go next.
Brilliant. I can see that you got very clear vision, and it's amazing. What is your view on potential? How you're going to strengthen all your views, working with partners, making relationship with like One Vision or other partners. How are you going to deliver all this?
We can't do it alone. Is the simple point.
Absolutely.
We're operating in ever challenging environments. As we sit in the minute, there'll be people, at homes struggling with a number of areas of, have I got enough money to do this? Have I got enough money to do that? Energy crises are increasing, costs are increasing, inflation is high. At the same time, we are moving away from a global pandemic. So you cannot deliver these things alone, and we have to, it's back to my point with the legacy from COVID. We have to take these partnerships that we've developed. We have to work with all of the entities, but, take One Vision and your aspirations, your vision, what you want. Actually, if you look at everyone's visions, there's a hell of a lot of synergies in there. There's a lot of, we're all doing the same thing in slightly different ways, or we all want to do the same commitment. So bringing that together has to be a powerful thing. So for me, yes, of course, we will absolutely focus on what we need to deliver as a public service, traditional words of what a public service is, but the collaboration, the partnerships, we've touched on the work that Christy's been doing through VPAC. It would be absolutely wrong if we lost what's been achieved out of COVID. To me, that is a perfect framework for how we will look at partnerships going forward, how we make sure that we're putting the right leverage in for each party, how we're giving access as well. You know, I think historically, perhaps at times, and I'll take this as a personal criticism. You know, when I first came into working in public service, I don't think I appreciated the value of community organisations, or we'd use the word partnership, but at times, did we really bring it to life enough? I'm not sure we did.
Yeah.
I think we're in a much stronger place around that now, and I think for me, there is an absolute commitment to our collaboration and our partnerships, and that's across our blue light services. We've got really strong collaboration working there, but I was talking to Charlie Hall as the Chief Constable about this the other week. There was always opportunity, and it would be wrong of us, remiss of us, to not keep driving for that change. And then at the same time, as I said, you've got to get those links absolutely right. And I don't think there's a single list of who those partners are. You know, that list changes by the week, but you constantly build on it, you constantly evolve. And that, again, that's a big legacy that we've got to take moving forward, and something I want to bring into my remit as the chair of the Resilience Forum. That's where we bring some of that collaboration, thinking and partnership together at that level, because I think we can do some really clever things going forward.
Brilliant. We slightly move away. We live in 21st century and it's 2022. You've probably seen One Vision recently celebrated International Women's Day. Yesterday we had Stephen Lawrence Memorial Day. We're still talking about, gender bias and racism. You worked in London many years. What is your view on inclusion, equality, and diversity?
So I think we're in a really difficult and interesting place, because my feeling is, as a professional in the sector, and I think most of us that have worked in this environment would say we can all link to, I feel, real positive change and direction of travel. The big challenge that we have, though, is that too often there are significant things happening with media headlines that we pick up on, and I think most of us will then, and you just drop your shoulders and shake your head and think, how can this be? How can that be? And that's whether some of the challenges that they've had in the Met Police or any main organisation that has had. So my view on where we're going from ED&I and the approach that we're taking to it, this is a constant journey of change. It would be foolish of me to turn around and say, do you know what, in 2024 I will have solved it for community protection, the Directorate, because that is it's a nonsense. That's not the approach we need to take. This is a constant journey of change that we're moving forward. But what we have to have is those really positive and open and direct forums, discussions. And I think for me, we've got our ED&I board that sits within community protection, brings together all of the staff engagement networks across my service areas. We've recently just recruited to a new post of Head of Diversity and Inclusion for the county. And Temi has joined us from Thurrock, I think it was. Forgive me, she'll probably tell me off for forgetting. I'm pretty sure it was Thurrock she came in from. But I know in the early conversations I've had with Temi that we've got to be forward thinking in this space. We've got to make sure that we are creating the right platforms. It's a conversation that Harjit and I have been having about how you really open up, and let's pick fire and rescue. Harjit said to me that he remembers when he was younger, there was traditionally the image of fire and rescue, that it was fit, young, white men in fire stations doing weights and that may well have been an image that was happening in the 80s, the 90s, and that. These are things that are evolving and changing. And as an organisation, we are absolutely, we want to recruit from across our communities. It is a community that represents us, and we are part of that community. We're not a bolt-on to the community, we are part of the community. So there's absolutely work we've got to do. Some of the statistics that I've got in my directorate, my data does not, my organisation does not represent the community. So we've got to look at those figures and make sure that we don't want to be shy in this space around it. We've got to have those really difficult and open conversations. I need to look at recruitment, retention, and absolutely working with different parts of the community to say, why is community protection not an attraction? Why is fire and rescue not your organisation of choice? But I think the key thing for me, though, with anything that we talk about with ED&I is what I'm really keen that we don't do is get into an environment of potential tokenism. And that's something that I think can be really, really destructive about how we move forward and how we develop our organisations. And as I said, I think we are on a journey that is working over a longer period of time, over years. Some of the decisions that we're making now will probably come to fruition in 20 years' time, but it's right we make those decisions now. And one area that I'm particularly keen on looking at for fire and rescue is a direct entry scheme. So as Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue, we're working with colleagues across NFCC, and there are a couple of chief fire officers that are leading on this. But this is about opening up fire and rescue to bring in a wider audience of people into the leadership of the business, into the leadership of the organisation. So absolutely recognising the sector competent skills you need to work in fire and rescue, but at the same time opening it up to make sure that we are bringing about change at the earliest opportunity. So for me, I think we're in a very strong place in community protection about how we're structured. I was really pleased to see the appointment of Temi coming into the county and how we'll work together across the broader county to start looking at our engagement networks, making sure that we are working collectively and collaboratively across the county. But again, you have to recognise this is not something that we are going to change overnight. And people will say, it's frustrating me, Alex, we've heard this for 20 years though. And I recognise that. And I think there are areas and problems and we shouldn't shy away from that. And we've got to call out those issues. We've got to have those really difficult conversations, but at the same time, look at the positives and the direction of travel and those achievements that I think we have had.
We got a great cricket female team, great football team. You probably nationally they're playing very good actually. So what is the gender split on your fire services?
So on the numbers where we currently sit, we are around, we're actually higher on female representation in fire and rescue than we are in the county.
Okay.
But again, it's still an area that we've got to make sure that we are developing. You know, there's a couple of things that I've found coming into the sector that I'm keen that we get into and start challenging. So I think you're right. I mean, you touched on female sports, you know, and this is, I've watched a number of debates on this actually, and you think, well, you see the viewing figures of England football. You know, if England are playing, don't quote me on the figures, I'm not great on them, but the disparity between the numbers watching England female football and male football is stark, the difference. But again, I think we are starting to see traction. And I think what's good is we're starting to see different broadcasters and media outlets and starting to actually put these games on television. And you know, and I think this is where something we've got to start championing those changes so that we see equity across the piece and we start to bring forward, you know, and my view is, you know, if you put a Manchester United game on, that has very high viewing figures. Well, we need to make sure that we are publicising wider sports and it's got to become a normal way of life and not also as a, it's back to my tokenism point. What we don't want to do is start bolting on or adding on. Actually, there's some great sport out there to watch and there's some really good opportunities. So as I said, I think it's these things will not change overnight, and I think if we tell ourselves they will, we're not actually going to make real difference in this space. And I think for me, as I said, organisationally, what I'm keen that we do when we recruit, the way that we retain, I want to make sure that we're really reaching out across the community. It's back into the early partnerships, isn't it? How do you get those good partnerships to make sure that I can get Hertfordshire Fire and Rescue or Hertfordshire County Council Community Protection Directorate to have a brand that people want to be part of and want to be keen to join? So that's the task for me that I take away, that I need to work with my team and my leadership team to make sure that we are really engaging effectively to attract people at those early stages.
Brilliant. I just want to ask you, you probably speak to the audience who is watching. When it comes to fire services, you know, people think it's fireman, male dominated organization. I want to talk about the ethnic minority and young females who are watching today, they're culturally different, to work with men, how your organization is welcoming, it's a safe place to work.
Yeah, yeah. So it's this is where one of those, this is about your early stage points, isn't it? And you're right. Traditionally, I grew up on Fireman Sam. It was a program that was out there, and I think where we've got to move towards now is that we have a strong build of people from all across different parts of the community coming into fire and rescue. And I think it's back to my point what Harjit and I were talking about. It's the image that you portray yourself as an organisation. So historic imagery would have been of predominantly white males, and that was the type of recruitment information that went out. And this is something particularly we focused on. I had some really strong feedback recently from colleagues around how we use imagery, how we speak about the fire service not just being about running in and out of burning buildings. It's the breadth of work that we deliver as an organisation. I touched on earlier, our protection work, our prevention work. We have a myriad of people doing a endless numbers of roles in there. And what I'm keen to do is to make sure that we are celebrating all of our colleagues that we've got, because I think we are starting to see now a real diverse mix of people in the sector, in the organisation.
Yeah.
And I'm really keen that we celebrate that. And we, because it's confidence builds confidence.
Exactly,
and I want people to see that we are an organisation of many functions and many people. And it's back to that, there are some of these straplines that you hear about, I want everyone in my business to be confident to bring themselves to work, and that we are an open employer and a transparent employer. And we recognise that everyone has something to offer. Everyone has something to give as part of that delivery that we put into fire and rescue. So, but I don't want to be, too, I recognise the challenges that I've got. I've said to you, some of the statistics are not where I want them to be. We have some really strong staff engagement networks that we are working on. We've got some really good, strong staff groups, but it's now my responsibility to be accountable for delivering and making sure that we are bringing to the fore. And again, how we recruit, how we retain, how we demonstrate to the community that we are an organisation of choice, because I want to attract people and want to be part of my business.
So how can people contact community protection or fire service? Is there any hotline you have, or?
So we've got a number of routes, different methods. I was going to say flippantly 999, but I won't say that to you. No, we've got a number of routes, and one of the points I would always direct people to, because there are so many functions that we offer. Please go onto our website, start having a look at the services that we're offering there. And that ranges from our safe and well visits to the work that we do, the things you'd expect to hear around smoke alarms and safety. But it also then talks about the work that we do with Prince's Trust or other courses that we're delivering. So there's a lot of information on our website as a starting point. You will see different areas, local publications that we're doing, because there is, as you touched on earlier, a lot of community work that we'll do all across the county. But I think one of the start points I'd always say for us as a really good engagement point is our website, because I'm absolutely keen that becomes a really good source of information for people. But I'm not selling that because I don't want to have the human contact behind it. It's just, I'd always appeal to people to have a look at what we do, because I think if you said to most people, what's the role of, the fire service, one, they won't mention the rescue element of it. And most of the time they'll say, well, you come out with something's on fire, don't you? But actually there's a hell of a lot more that goes on around fire and rescue services. So my start point would be is that please look at our website. You can access that either directly or through the County Council's website. So it's the hertfordshire.gov.uk website. And there is a wealth of information on there. It's quite an easy to use site, fairly interactive in areas, and it will talk you through the services we offer. But that also includes what we do as part of our trading standards regulatory standard side. And I'd appeal to people to have a look at there, because there's a lot of information on, I touch on things like scams and other areas. And I think trading standards, regulatory standards is often an area of the community that people don't fully have an understanding of what they can benefit from and some of the services we offer. So I'd welcome you look at that as well.
As a father of two kids, you said you got two children?
Four, actually.
Four,
It's my
okay.
my
Yeah,
two younger ones. Yeah, but I've got four.
as a father of four children, and you're holding a great place. What one key message you will give to the people who lost their trust, living with long COVID, lost hope? Just one key message you will give to those who are watching today.
I think we always have to look to the future. That, you know, you can look back through history, and there have always been challenging, complex and difficult things that are thrown on us globally. And the reasons and the rationales and the whys and what fors are, you know, we can debate forever, but I think there always has to be hope. If you lose hope of a future, if you lose hope of moving forward and aspirations and dreams. So if I was having this conversation with my children, and they would have been impacted like many would have been, where they've lost that momentum, they've lost that spark, that significant change in their life. It's that focus on your future and your dreams and the opportunities. And that message, you know, for those that have lost loved ones and will be absolutely difficult. But I think if you lose that hope of better things and good things, well, that's quite a difficult place to start from, isn't it? So I think my view is that, you know, we must build, we must review, we must move forward from this, because otherwise what's it all for? You know, to lose that spirit of hope, to lose that opportunity of trying to bring better things, trying to build a stronger community, trying to bring back, you know, really strong relationships. That's, to me, the hope I would ask people to focus on, because otherwise it can be a pretty dark and difficult place. And I think, you know, we've always got to be realistic that there will be challenges as we start to move back as a community again. But it's us that can do it. You know, there's no magic entity out there. We are the community, we are the people, we are the services. So if each one of us takes a little bit of that responsibility on and moves into offer something back in, whether that's to volunteer, whether that's to come into services, whether that's to look at those roles that are really adding value, that's what I'd ask people to do and consider moving forward.
Thank you so much for joining today, Alex. It's a very important key message you've given to us. Thank you for your time as well. Thank you for your team who's delivering behind the scene, and thank you so much. I'm sure that you will take this to your team as well. Our gratitude to them during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for watching. If you're watching today, and we thank you so much, it's a very key message given by Alex. Please share it in your website or in your social media platform. This message is very important for everybody to know, everybody to share, because this gives us a hope. There is a county council working tirelessly to help those people, and the community protection team are looking into it. Thank you so much.